Well, first, I want to thank everyone for, listening in to this wonderful conversation that we're going to have with the candidate for New York's 13th Congressional District. And we're really excited to have her join us today. My name is Tanya Bonner. I am the chair of the WaHI-Inwood Task Force on Noise, which is an advocacy group, grassroots advocacy group that we started back in 2020 to address quality of life issues that were not being addressed by our local elected officials. And also I was a board member of Community Board 12 Manhattan, which represents Washington Heights and Inwood for 5 years. And I was also at one point the second vice chair of that board. And so I'd like to welcome you, and I'd like you to introduce yourselves, just tell us who you are and a little bit about your campaign, anything you'd like to tell us today.
Yeah. Thanks so much again for having me. I'm so excited for this conversation. My name is Darializa or Darializa Avila Chevalier, running for Congress here in New York 13. I am a working class daughter of Dominican immigrants, and I have been organizing up here for over 14 years. I was working on my sociology degree and PhD, and was working at a public defender's office as an investigator, and have been organizing my entire adult life around ending mass incarceration, around immigration justice, and around Palestine. And for me, a lot of that intersects with the day-to-day realities that we face here as New Yorkers, particularly in uptown the Bronx. And I'm running because I think it's time that we have representation that's actually present, that can look around and say, have the things in my community improved? And if they haven't, what can I do to fight even harder for them to make sure that things actually improve for the people who live here? And, over the course of my organizing, and as someone who has lived here, I myself have experienced a lot of the issues that we're running on in terms of our platform. And that's why I'm running to win housing for all, to make sure that we are abolishing ICE and to make sure that our tax dollars come back to our communities and invest in our babies and not the bombs that we're dropping on communities abroad. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And I just want to say I'm a alum of Columbia University. So I want to just say hello on that level because I know you also attend there. So first I just want to say I want to congratulate you on the endorsement from the mayor
Thank
of
you.
New York City. That is a major, major thing. And just want to congratulate you on that and just ask you how that has helped you and changed things for your campaign.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to have the support of the mayor. I began knocking on doors for him back in February of last year. And, I've been organizing for a really long time. And when I started knocking on doors for him, I was in a dark place because I had just spent almost 2 years working to end the genocide and doing everything I knew how to do as an organizer. And it was still happening. And I was looking around my own community and things weren't improving here. Right. And so seeing the way that our money was being used to slaughter people while our own conditions were getting actively worse here. And it was getting back to the basics. A friend of mine called me up and said, "Hey, you want to knock on doors for Zoran? He's running for mayor." And I was like, "Sure." And it was getting back to the basics of talking to my neighbors that got me out of that hole. It was being reminded that people are with us, that they share our values, but they were also feeling this politics of cynicism that has really enveloped so much of us for so long. And it was doing the work of rebuilding that politics of hope, of telling people, hey, here's an opportunity for us to actually have the type of government that we want that will actually be responsive to us as working people, that really allowed me to think of this as a vehicle, this campaign as a vehicle for something much bigger than this one seat. And I'm so deeply grateful to him for his support, because we have been able to finally get the media attention that has focused on the issues that this district needs attention on. And so, I think for a lot of our campaign, we were being told that this district did not care about these issues, that this was not a race of significance, that that you just don't challenge the head of the CHC or someone on the appropriations committee. And I think on the ground, the hunger was there. People were hungry for something different. They were hungry for a different type of politics. But the perception from mainstream media was that that was not the case. And so it was after his endorsement that really we started getting an influx of media to our campaign and attention on this district. And I think that's just reflective of the type of politics we've had for far too long that ignores our community, ignores the issues that are so important to us, that impact our day-to-day lives. And the fact that now, we're being discussed, this race, this district is being discussed across the country, is reflective of what we've been trying to build from the very beginning, is to bring attention to these issues. Because to me, it's absurd that in a district where some of the greatest giants of our movements came out of here, that this district is consistently ignored, that we have representation that has left us as the second poorest congressional district in the country. And it's time that our issues be discussed on the national stage.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Now, how do you plan, speaking of which, in terms of our current representation, how do you plan to connect with and represent all of the constituents in this district? Because one of the concerns that people in our district have is that they are not being addressed, that their needs are not being addressed, that it's kind of the focus is sort of very singularly
Mhm.
aimed at one particular constituency and that other people are not being represented. So how would you represent all of the, how would you address this and how would you represent all of us in this district?
Yeah, I've always believed that anything worth doing in life is worth doing together, and that we can only build power for working people if we bring the entire community together. And I've been very intentional from the very beginning about saying that we need to build a strong coalition, right? One that can translate into a co-governance structure, and building that out continuously, long past this primary, long past the general, right? And making sure that we are constantly building connections with different segments of our community to make sure that no one in our community feels that their representative isn't showing up for them, right? And making sure that we have that structure, because right now we lack that structure, right? And what I hear so often is folks going for constituent services and never hearing back from the representative, community groups reaching out and not hearing back for years. And I've had, disappointingly, I've had folks say, thank you for running, this is the first time our representative has reached out in 9 years. And, it was disappointing, but it wasn't shocking, because I'm someone who's reached out to his office over the course of my organizing and had never heard back until we launched this campaign. And I just don't think working class people should have to run for office to hear from their representative, right? And I think if we actually had robust constituent services, if we had a co-governance structure, if we had someone who is willing to listen from every single person, whether they agree with them or not, in this district, right? I think we would have a much different outlook as to what government can and should be for people in this district.
Thank you for that. Now, how would you approach the work, kind of going along with what you were already discussing? How would you approach this work differently than the incumbent? What would you do differently than the incumbent?
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a number of questions here. One is, how do you govern, right? How do you make political decisions about a bill that crosses your desk, right? And part of that is making sure that you already have relationships with partners who are subject matter experts on the different issues that will come across your desk, right? So that when a bill on, I don't know, let's say transit comes across my desk, I can call folks who are, the unions for transit workers to talk about, like, how does this impact our community? We can call the folks who are most impacted in the community by any particular piece of legislation, and we can bring them into that work of organizing. I am an organizer, and I think one of the biggest benefits of sending an organizer to Congress is that we don't take no for an answer. We use every lever at our disposal, and we get really creative about how to use them, because I'm very used to being out resourced and outnumbered and still having an outsized impact. And I think it's deeply important that we bring people into that work. I, from the very beginning said, if we're going to run this campaign, it needs to be a vehicle for people to come into movement work. So we have to have a strong coalition of both national and local grassroots partners for people to be able to find their political homes, so that we can have that kind of infrastructure for larger community conversations throughout the process of governing. Because if we are serious about this project of democracy, it needs to be a democratic process, and it needs to have democratic structures. And so, I think another aspect of this is accountability. How do you make sure that your representative is actually accountable to these structures of co-governance, to these structures of community building? And a lot of that also has to do with money, right? And the money that we find in politics. And so I am very proud to have built a campaign where we have raised over $1 million, where the average donation was $66. Because what that tells us is that there is hunger, that people, working class people, want this type of politics. They want to be able to trust that their representative is fighting for them and not corporations. And so, when I look at the difference between my opponent and I, he has taken hundreds of thousands from real estate developers, from right-wing lobbies like APAC, from Republican donors, from ICE contractors, right? And that money, it really translates into what we're seeing in policy. So, for example, he takes $115,000 from ICE contractors and has voted for $8.8 billion in ICE funding, right? He takes over $250,000 from the real estate developers that are pricing us out, and the rents keep rising. People keep getting pushed out, and we're in a point where, we've seen the fastest or the largest number of Black and Dominican and Latino communities leaving the city altogether, right? And then we're also seeing, for example, the fact that he's taken so much in direct contributions from APAC, and that has translated into him voting time and time again to send more of our tax dollars to Israel in the form of bombs, in the form of arms. And that means that our children aren't getting those tax dollars, right? They're not receiving the benefits of that money because instead it's going towards a genocide and towards slaughter. In the first 6 days of this war with Iran, for example, we could have already funded the universal childcare program that Mayor Mamdani ran on, because it is costing us $1 billion a day to bomb children in Iran.
Thank you for that. What are the top three needs of this district that you would work on addressing if you were elected?
Yeah, so I am running to win housing for all, to abolish ICE, and to make sure that our tax dollars come back home to invest in our babies and not bombs. And I came to this platform both as someone who has been through a lot of these issues myself, has experienced them, but also as someone who spent almost a year knocking on doors for the mayor and hearing directly from voters about what it was that was creating hardship for them. And door after door, it was immigration, it was housing, and it was the fact that so many folks were moving away because the things that our children need were so deeply unaffordable. And realizing that we have a childhood poverty problem here in this district, where over 40% of our kids are living below the poverty line. That's compared to 26% of the whole population in this district. Like, that
And
is
you
an outrageous number.
and you've had a chance to you've been out here in our community as well, knocking on doors. Have you had a chance to speak to some of our constituents here, and what are they telling you?
Yeah, I think for a lot of them, this really resonates, because when we talk about housing, for example, whether it's folks in NYCHA or folks who are in market rate housing, the conditions are getting worse and worse for people, and the cost of living is rising, right? And housing is such an essential part of affordability. It is also a human right. And the fact that we are seeing the quality of housing go down consistently while the prices keep going up, I think is a testament to this larger system where we continue to put profit over people. We could be investing in NYCHA. We can fight for a Green New Deal for public housing that would make sure that public housing residents have dignified housing, that we're providing good union jobs in the process, that we're decarbonizing it so that our health and our environment is actually better and cleaner. And we would be putting $96 billion over the course of 10 years into the New York City economy by passing a Green New Deal. We can make sure that we're fighting back against bad landlords by passing the Tenants' Rights to Organize Act, because we know that when tenants have the right to organize, evictions go down. We save money on social services. For every dollar that we save in an evict, or that we every dollar that we spend in preventing eviction is $2 to $5 we're saving on the social services that people will then need after their entire life is destabilized from an eviction. We can also make sure that people are actually getting the repairs that their landlords owe them by law, right? By holding these landlords accountable. And we can address childhood poverty, because we know during the pandemic, we had the child tax credit, which was expanded, and it brought childhood poverty down to historic levels. And the fact that we interrupted that program, it was so cruel. And the fact that now we're seeing those rates of poverty rise again is a direct result of a failure of leadership, a failure of moral clarity, and a unwillingness to actually pass the policies that we know are proven to actually support our children.
Yes. One of the questions we had from one of our members is I asked them if they had any questions for you. And one was about universal basic income. And how would, is that something, what is your stance on that? And how would you help the working middle class in Washington Heights and Inwood?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need universal basic income because I think the basics should just be a guarantee, right, for human dignity, but also for a strong economy. We also, need to have a federal jobs guarantee. We need to make sure that people who want to work can work. Because I also, I think a lot of times I'm a democratic socialist, and a lot of times what I hear is like, oh, socialists don't want to work. But that's actually at the opposite of what socialism is, right? Socialism is an understanding that work is at the heart of what gives our lives purpose, and that we should be able to lead dignified lives and find meaning and dignity in our work, right? And what we see right now is that work is so deeply exploitative that most of us don't really like our jobs, right? Because we just feel we're being exploited day in and day out, and we're not reaping the benefits of the wealth that we're producing for our society. And I think that at the heart of it is the question of human dignity and finding work that is dignified, that actually allows people to have the means to pay for a dignified place to live, to put food on the table for their children, but also to like live their lives and enjoy it.
Absolutely. And quality of life, of course, our task force deals with a lot of quality of life issues. It's a major concern in our community. And fortunately, it's gotten a lot of attention in New York City. The police department created its own quality of life unit recently and all of these things. So we are, really concerned about how this is impacting our ability to live
Yeah.
peacefully in our communities. And this includes crime, excessive noise pollution, poor infrastructure, living in the shadow of ICE, et cetera. How would you address those issues? How would you help us and work with our constituents here in addressing quality of life issues?
Yeah, so I have been organizing around a number of these issues for many years, but I've also working on my PhD in sociology, have really um, thought about these issues in a much more expansive sense, right? When it comes to issues of safety, I focused on criminology and understanding the impact of our criminal system on our community, and particularly on our immigrant community, and thinking about how in a time where we are the most militarized and well-funded state when it comes to policing and prisons, so many of us still feel so deeply unsafe, right? We are afraid to walk in our own communities. And I think that has a lot to do with the divestment from the resources that actually bring safety to our communities. And that includes things like after school programs for our kids so that we know where they are and we know that they're safe, right? That includes making sure that we are providing mental health services to our community, making sure that people have access to dignified healthcare, dignified housing, that we are supporting the social safety nets that we know allow people to continue to live in dignity, as opposed to suffering from mental health crisis when you suffer from unemployment, for example. And any moment where we're seeing these social safety nets failing, whether it be because unemployment insurance didn't cover their rent, or because we didn't have strong renter protections, and then folks were evicted from their homes, we're seeing an increase in conditions that are unsafe for our community. And I think we have to, as a society, really start thinking about these issues on a larger structural scale. Because if it's something that all of us are experiencing, then this is a failure of our social structure, not of any one individual.
Absolutely. So there's a long history of Black people in this community feeling dismissed, ignored, and disregarded, by our elected officials here. There's an example of, and you may or may not have heard about it, but your opponent, our incumbent, was heavily involved in establishing a Dominican historic district in our community. Now, our community wasn't opposed to honoring, the strong Dominican community here. It was the fact that everybody was kept out of the process, including our Black elected officials who represent us in the state. legislature. They wrote letters saying we weren't even included, our voices weren't included. This community has a strong Black presence, including the Malcolm X Center. Lots of famous musical artists lived in this community. We had a history of elected governmental officials and that leaders that lived in this community, and we felt that the voices were not included at all. And I personally helped to organize our community in time for a vote on this, and with the state agency that was going to vote on this, and it did not pass. They did not have the voice to pass because they listened to us and they heard us. However, it was still pushed through via the chair of that board that said he had the power to still push it through. And so how would you turn that around in terms of how people here have felt disregarded, dismissed, and how would you have could have done something different in terms of that situation? I
I
know it's a
think
loaded question,
no,
but
and
I
it's and
just,
I think
yeah.
it's at the heart of what we're talking about in this election. Actually, is a politics of cynicism, a politics of division, and a politics that tells us that empowering one community can only come at the expense of disempowering another. And that's just an idea I completely reject. This community has always been one where Black and Latino and Dominican, Puerto Rican, all of us have lived side by side, and we've never been enemies, right? The enemy has been a structure that tells us that we can only have the things that we need to lead dignified lives at the cost of the other members of our community. And the reality is that we can only get the things we need to lead dignified lives if we come together and build power for all of us. Because this is a district that is not only one where the majority of people are people of color, it is also the heart and capital of so much of the culture of what it is to be Black American in this country, what it means to be Afro Latino or Latino in general in this country, right? What it means to be Dominican. This is home to Little Dominican Republic, Harlem, the capital of Black culture and history and organizing. And it really is just heartbreaking to see politics that has told us this lie that we're somehow at odds with one another. And, this history goes back hundreds of years. The first free sailor to come from the Dominican Republic, he was a Black man from Santo Domingo who came over 400 years ago here to New York. Our histories have been intertwined for centuries, right? And to have someone who has been engaging in this deeply divisive rhetoric, who right now has surrogates in the Dominican Republic, spreading lies about me in Dominican media that are so deeply racist, who are engaging in disinformation campaigns that are just sowing more division and fanning the flames of this really MAGA style politics. And for that to be a Democratic incumbent, right, I think is just testament to what we have been saying, where you can't say you're a Democrat, you can't say you're a progressive while engaging in the same tactics that Trump was engaging in when Obama was president. You can't, like, I have folks asking me for my birth certificate now. I was born in the US. So what does the birth certificate matter, right? In terms of like saying that I am Dominican, right? Or my family is Dominican. And I think it's just like this kind of like politic that we are all so tired of, because we know that the only thing it does is destroy and tear apart our communities. It's distracting us from the conversations around housing that are disproportionately impacting Black and Latino communities, right? We have seen over the last 20 years 200,000 Black New Yorkers leave the city. We have seen over the last few years how Little Dominican Republic, the majority is now no longer Dominican, right? And that is the product of the politics that we have had for far too long. This is the political leadership that has led us to this moment, where instead of talking about the housing crisis that our leadership created, instead of talking about the childhood poverty rates that our leadership subjected our children to, right? Instead of talking about the fact that ICE is raiding our communities, now we're having this conversation around whether or not my identity as the daughter of Dominican immigrants is valid.
Mm. Now, I was looking and I woke up to someone's post. I only have two more questions, but I was looking at someone's post and that I know and is in our community, and they took a picture with the incumbent, and the person said they were encourage people to vote for the incumbent, and they were saying these are serious times. I want someone in Congress who understands the job and has experience doing it, not someone cosplaying government whose primary qualification is organizing student protests on a university campus. That's what was said. I wanted to find out for you, your response to that. People saying you're too progressive for this, you're not the right person. Why would you be the best person for in this moment in time in New York City to represent the 13th congressional district? Why are you the best person, and how would you respond to those criticisms?
I think of this question of experience, and I wonder what has almost 30 years of the incumbent's experience in politics actually delivered for our community, where rent is over $4,000, and that's considered affordable in a district where the average income is $57,000 a year, where more and more Black and Latino New Yorkers are leaving the city altogether because they cannot afford to stay here, where more and more of our neighbors are sleeping on the street, where more and more of us feel deeply unsafe in our own communities. What has that gotten us? And I have been organizing my entire adult life. I have successfully organized mutual aid programs for folks who were left out of the stimulus program during the pandemic. I have, successfully gotten immigrant New Yorkers out of ICE detention. And I've done all of that while holding no political office. And, oops, sorry, the light came off. But
Well, it
I've done
happens.
all of that while holding no political office. And I think it's deeply important to this question of experience. What kind of experience? Because I'm someone who has experienced the abandonment of our leadership. I'm someone who has felt deeply frustrated by the fact that we'd have politicians blame us for the problems that were created by the policies that they were enacting, right? And I think the experience of what a everyday New Yorker goes through is one that is so deeply important to understanding the policies that will have an impact on our day-to-day lives going forward. And as an organizer, being an organizer is very humbling because it forces you to understand that you cannot do any of this by yourself. You are not the subject matter expert on another person's lived experience. And so you have to engage with community to actually understand how the policies that we're passing and voting on are going to impact those members of our community. And, again, the benefit of sending an organizer to Congress is that I don't take no for an answer. I'm so used to being under resourced, being outnumbered, but knowing who to call on and how to call on my community to support me to have an outsized impact on what everyone told us was impossible.
Yes, thank you so much. Now, in closing, is there anything that you would like to tell us? Actually, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll get to the closing. But there is another question. I'm sorry, someone sent me. It said it's about 311. We've had issues with, about quality of life and reporting 311. We've been asking, our group personally has been asking for an audit of 311 because 311 complaints are closed out. I know that there's like a local issue, but how can you help constituents, you think, navigate those situations where they're not getting anywhere with the 311 system, reporting quality of life, and they're not getting anywhere with our local elected city officials? How could you play a role in helping to improve that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this also has to do with the quality of the relationship between federal officials and local electeds, right, and local officials, right? And being able to actually have conversations around, well, what can we be doing on the federal level to support the city level structures that are making life either easier or, in sometimes, to your point, harder, right, for folks, and making sure that those voices are elevated. And I think on the federal level, what we're seeing right now is leadership that isn't responsive to the constituent services that it needs to be responsive to. And so a lot of that work falls on other levels of government to be responsive to, which to be clear, isn't like if this is an immigration issue, that's not the job of a city official, right? That is a federal issue, right? And on one level, being able to just take some of that work that is the responsibility of the federal representative to take on, and take that off the plate of other levels of government, but also being a partner and saying, hey, actually, what would make it easier for the city to be responsive on this issue? Actually, more federal funding. Great, good to know. Gonna go back to Washington and fight for that funding, right? And so having the ability to have that kind of dialogue, to be able to work together, so that even if folks come into my office and it is a city level issue, we already know what the city is going to say because we have a good relationship, and we can like direct them to the correct person or the direct office and make sure that those resources are being provided to the constituents.
Okay. And last question is for you. Just, I'm going to open it up to you. Any closing comments, anything you like the people here in Washington Heights and Inwood to know about you, to know about your campaign, and about what you like them to do tomorrow on election day?
Yeah. Well, I am just so deeply grateful to this community for taking this race seriously and for, caring about the issues that are impacting so many of us here. And I think we have been ignored for far too long. We're spoken of as though we're only statistics and not people who are worth fighting for at every level of government. And it's just been such an honor to run this race with my community and to fight for the things that I know that we all deserve. And I know that win or lose, we're gonna continue to build that work because we can deliver for our people when we do that together. But I am really excited to win with you all. I'm so excited to be able to build out government that is actually responsive to our community, that will work tooth and nail to fight for the things that we need. We need funding for our housing. We need to make sure that we're holding bad landlords accountable. We need to create pathways to homeownership. We need to fight for our kids, invest in their schools, invest in the child tax credit, invest in the families here so that they can stay here. And we need to fight for our immigrant community because they are also, we feel the effects day in and day out when our neighbors feel that they have to live in the shadows. And we deserve representation that's going to fight for us, that's going to listen to us even when we disagree with them, who's going to actually hold space for the things that are making our lives harder and fight to make our lives more dignified. And so I am so grateful for all of the work that everyone in this campaign, everyone who has supported us has put in. And I need you all to come out and canvass and make sure that everybody comes out to vote, so that we can show that this politic is not only deeply popular, but that it is going to deliver because the people are going to help deliver it. And come out tomorrow, June 23rd, for Election Day. Please vote to make sure your values are represented in Washington.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And I'm sure Washington Heights and Inwood residents are going to be very, very grateful to hear from you and hear what you have to say about the campaign. And I wish you all the luck in your campaign.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Tanya.